Chapter 1. In the Dirt. My journey of growth began when I found myself in a place that I can only describe as being in the dirt. Similar to the life of any plant, the first stage is when you make the conscious decision to plant the seed. Although there are plants that spring from natural elements, going through separation and divorce, those seeds have to be intentionally planted. Divorce in general can feel as if you are being completely uprooted from your foundation. From there, you'd be placed in a vase forged from marriage counselors and divorce lawyers, awaiting your fate of eventually being handed to someone else. Oftentimes, people find themselves hurrying the process and getting swept away by the first customer that comes along. I tend to view this as an attempt to find refuge in a home. After all, we are social creatures who enjoy the company of other people, especially one in whom we can share some of the most intimate details of our lives. With that in mind, it doesn't make those who are quickly swept up flawed people. Any flower enthusiast has to learn at some point, though, that some bouquets just don't last as long as others. During this phase of being in the dirt, the haze of irreconcilable differences were the worst for me. The imagery that I find myself envisioning resembles a dark cave. I see myself wandering around with my arms out in front of me, feeling for a way out. I bump into another unsuspecting husband, boyfriend, or spouse in which I give them a warm greeting and inquire about how they had gotten there. Then after half-heartedly listening to their situation, I give them my advice on how to get out. Besides, the way that they were feeling around in the dark was not as conducive as mine. I knew exactly how to find my way out because I had been feeling around in the cave much longer than them. Hindsight, that was actually an absurd way of viewing reality given the fact that I was no longer out of that cold, damp, puddle-ridden environment than they were. If anything, my feet were just more pruned from repeatedly walking through the same puddle. Yet, I was determined to help as many people as I could. After many failed attempts of seeing my way out of that cave, the cobwebs of life continued to startle me. They barraged my face and newly shaved bald head almost every step towards my attempt at reconciliation. This is when I internalized the timeless quote by Aristotle. Quote, "The more you know you don't know." I wish I would have read more Fruitful Reads then because it would have given my mind a much-needed break from my current obsession. Eventually, I was led to a quote from the Bible. It was to be my cell phone background for the next several months and quoted, "Be still and know that I am God." So I sat in my seclusion and realized that attempting to claw myself out of this hole of self-pity and remorse was useless. Some battles just aren't meant to be fought outside of the spiritual realm. If you are not familiar with the love tank analogy, it's the theory introduced by Gary Chapman in his book, The 5 Love Languages. The book illustrates a gaugeable tank in romantic relationships. The tank can be filled by doing things that will make the feelings for your spouse deeper. On the contrast, there are actions that will drain those feelings as well. I feel as if many people wake up to discover themselves here and can't quite comprehend exactly how it happened. The love in their relationship has dwindled, and they are shocked to discover that their spouse's love tank has a puncture. If you have not read the book, The 5 Love Languages by Gary, I highly recommend it. Not only for your romantic relationship, but relationship with people in general. Now, in all fairness, there may be other elements at work during those times. A person may feel as if the love tank of their spouse should already be topped off. For example, a midlife crisis or the grass is greener syndrome could be the reasoning. Other instances where this is not the case, though, the breach happened the instant you started to neglect your spouse and failed to see the attraction fading. When you are busy raising children and responsibility starts to take the place of romance, they call this the land of the illities. The place where couples are more concerned about boring things like stability, dependability, accountability, etc. You get the idea. Whether it was done unintentional or not, the outcome would still be the same. Being still in my self-imposed solitude is where I was able to find 3 important pieces of advice. Upon application, I found these 3 as being imperative to my healing process due to its influence of accelerating my process of growth. In my opinion, healing and growth run parallel with each other. The advice was to do nothing, work on yourself, and focus on the children. For myself, these three things appeared impossible to achieve. At that moment in time, all logical thinking was non-existent. More about that later in the book. But I couldn't believe that I was being advised to do something that had absolutely nothing to do with reconciliation. It seemed asinine. Those three nuggets of advice took many authors, researchers, and clergymen decades to mine. I didn't have my mind open to receive those messages fully back then, but I'm learning how to now. The first piece of advice was contended by my ego, and my ego was heavily armored with my pride. My ego protested that doing nothing didn't make any sense. Doing nothing is exactly what got me into this position, and maybe the sole reason I failed to withhold my marriage vows. I did nothing to thwart off temptation and irrational thinking. I was supposed to sit on my hands and watch everything that I worked for dissolve? The answer was yes. The more that I did, only made my situation worse. I read a book by Dr. Wayne Dyer in which I am currently reading through it again called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. One of the analogies that he describes gives the comparison between human life and a body of water. The times when we struggle the most is the times when we are attempting to force things to happen. The first example that I can think of is when a person plans a trip, laying out the itinerary for the days that they'll be vacationing. The trip then turns out to be a disaster because it didn't go the way that it was pictured in their head. That's because the times that are the most memorable are the spontaneous, free-flowing ones. Water doesn't struggle or plan its path, but has made its way into everything, bringing life. If you can bring that ability to flow freely into our way of living in romantic relationships, we wouldn't struggle with worry and disappointment. The second piece of advice was to work on myself. I felt that this particular advice was an oxymoron. I would be complete if my wife would not only let me back into